We live in interesting times. Today's stories. Thousands march in Marseille against pensions reform. India protests continue in New Delhi against citizenship law. Guterres says developed countries should keep their borders open to refugees. Erdogan says the lack of aid for refugees forced Turkey into Syria operations. China urges the United Nations to ease North Korea's sanctions and says the dialogue must not regress. A German man is extradited from the U.S. after 33 years in prison for double murder. Venezuelans fleeing the crisis find precarious stability in Bolivia. Plus, the taiko drum continues to attract audiences across generations. This is Eagle News coming to you from Virginia Beach, Virginia, bringing you stories from around the globe. I am Sarah Nachman. Thousands of protesters hit the streets in Marseille in a pensions reform standoff that has sparked nearly 2 weeks of crippling transport strikes, with the government vowing it will not give in to union demands to drop the overhaul. Teachers, hospital workers, and other public employees joined transport workers for the third day of marches since the dispute began on December 5. According to police estimates, more than 200,000 people turned out for dozens of rallies across the country as a huge march began at the Place de la République in Paris. The Eiffel Tower was closed because of the protests and police were on high alert, wary of a repeat of earlier marches when shops were vandalized and vehicles set on fire. The hardline CGT union said electricity workers cut power to some 50,000 homes near Bordeaux and 40,000 in line overnight as part of the protest, warning that bigger cuts could follow. The government has insisted it will push through a single points-based pension system and end the current patchwork of 42 separate schemes that offer early retirement to many in the public sector. It says the new system will be fairer and more transparent, improving pensions for women and low earners in particular. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe told Parliament on the eve of new talks with unions, quote, "My determination and that of the government and the majority is total." Critics say the changes could force millions of people to work beyond the official retirement age of 62, one of the lowest in Europe, by setting a pivot age of 64 that would ensure a full pension. Protests continue in New Delhi against the new controversial citizenship law described by critics as anti-Muslims. In a Muslim-populated area, buses were destroyed, a police outpost was torched, tear gas was launched, and protesters hurled stones at the police.
पब्लिक थी, प्रदर्शन कर रही थी, कोई लड़ाई झगड़ा कुछ नहीं था। एक घंटे बाद पुलिस फोर्स आई यहाँ पर, उसके बाद में पुलिस ने आंसू गैस छोड़े 2 घंटे तक। पुलिस पब्लिक हटी नहीं थी, यहाँ से जो है रोड पर प्रदर्शन कर रही थी। फिर बाद में लाठी चार्ज वगैरह हुआ, पुलिस ने जो है इनको भगाया है सर।
पुलिस का रवैया शुरू में बहुत अच्छा था, प्रोटेस्ट हो रहा था, दोनों आपस में बढ़िया कम्युनिकेशन था, लेकिन बीच में आके जब वो उपद्रव और ये जो है पुलिस में मतलब जो पथराव हुआ तो फिर जो है दोनों बेकाबू।
Police fired tear gas at protesters in India's capital Tuesday as tens of thousands rallied around the country against a new citizenship law they say is anti-Muslim, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi remained defiant. The law grants citizenship to non-Muslims from 3 neighboring countries and what opponents say is part of Modi's Hindu nationalist master plan. Uproar over the move has sparked days of protest, clashes, and riots across India that have left 6 people dead and dozens injured in a major challenge to Modi since he swept to power in 2014. In Muslim-populated areas of Delhi on Wednesday, buses and a police outpost were torched and tear gas-filled streets as thousands of protesters hurled stones at police in Seelampur district in the latest violence to hit the capital. Tens of thousands more rallied in West Bengal, Kolkata, and Tamil Nadu states on a 6-day of nationwide protest. But the Prime Minister was adamant that the Citizenship Amendment Act, or the CAA, passed last week, would not affect Indian nationals, including Muslims. He blamed the opposition Congress Party for, quote, spreading violence and creating an environment of fear by lying about the law's intent. Modi told a political rally in eastern Jharkhand state, quote, it's as clear as being engraved in stone that the CAA will not affect any citizen, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, or anyone else. In the eastern city of Kolkata, more than 20,000 protesters joined a fresh march led by West Bengali Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee, a fierce critic of Modi. Banerjee, who also led protests on Monday, told the crowd the law would not be implemented, quote, for as long as I am alive. Filmmaker Gautam Ghosh, also at the march, said the law would divide the country. He said, quote, if the federal government tries to implement the law, there will be more bloodshed. People will not accept it. Banerjee said train services were disrupted after railway tracks were blocked by protesters, while nearly 700 people have been arrested. Authorities have imposed internet blackouts and used force to shut down rallies and sit-ins across several states. In the northeastern state of Assam, the epicenter of the protest, where 4 people died after being shot by police, a curfew imposed in some regions was lifted early Tuesday. At a global refugee summit in Geneva, U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says developed countries should not only financially support developing countries to keep the refugees, they should also have their borders open to them. With a full 80% of the world's refugees living in poor and developing countries, which often feel left to shoulder the heavy economic and societal cost alone, burden sharing is high on the agenda at the meeting.
And that we cannot have a concept of burden sharing based on the idea that developing countries keep the refugees and developed countries support financially the developing countries to keep the refugees. I think burden sharing is also for developed countries to have their borders open to asylum seekers seeking protection and to give a fair treatment to their claims.
The flows of population are becoming more complicated to manage. There are more causes, as was mentioned, including climate change, that move people along. We need, I know I get this question all the time, we need to uphold the refugee definition that is enshrined in the international legal system, because
UN Chief Antonio Guterres called on countries to take joint responsibility for caring for a surging number of displaced people as he opened a global refugee summit in Geneva Tuesday. Guterres said, quote, it is a moment to build a more equitable response to refugee crisis through a sharing of responsibility. With a full 80% of the world's refugees living in poor and developing countries, which often feel left to shoulder the heavy economic and societal cost alone, burden sharing is high on the agenda at the meeting. Stressing, though, that gratitude is not enough, Guterres said, quote, the world owes all countries and communities that welcome large numbers of refugees a debt of gratitude. At this time of turbulence, the international community must do far more to shoulder their responsibility together. The need for the world's wealthier nations to do their share will likely be hammered home by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey is the world's largest refugee host, with more than 3 million refugees on its soil, mainly from Syria. Erdogan is expected to renew demands for more international support and could also reiterate his threat to allow millions of Syrian refugees to go to Europe if the international community does not do more. The forum began exactly a year after the UN General Assembly adopted a framework aimed at creating a more predictable and equitable approach to providing assistance to refugees and host communities. The meeting is the first of its kind, pulling together heads of state, government ministers, but also business leaders, humanitarians, and refugees themselves to offer ideas and pledges for more efficient support. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says a lack of international assistance to Turkey to support millions of refugees on its soil pushed Ankara to launch operations in northeast Syria.
Uluslararası toplumdan arzu ettiğimiz desteği göremeyince biz de başımızın çaresine bakmak zorunda kaldık.
Up next, China urges the United Nations to ease North Korea's sanctions and says the dialogue must not regress. A German man is extradited from the U.S. after 33 years in prison for double murder. Venezuelans fleeing the crisis find precarious stability in Bolivia. Plus, the taiko drum continues to attract audiences across generations. Eagle News will be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Eagle News coming to you from Virginia Beach. I am Sarah Nachman. China on Tuesday urged the UN Security Council to unanimously back its joint proposal with Russia to ease sanctions on North Korea, warning that dialogue to resolve nuclear tensions must not regress. The nuclear-armed North has issued increasingly strident declarations in recent weeks if Washington does not come up with some concessions. For his part, President Donald Trump said Monday that he would be disappointed if North Korea had something in the works, warning that if it did, we'll take care of it. Trump said at the White House, quote, "We're watching it very closely." Negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang have largely been stalled since the collapse of a February summit in Hanoi between Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The North is under heavy U.S. and United Nations sanctions over its nuclear program, but it has been frustrated at the lack of relief after it declared a moratorium on nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile tests. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang said at a regular press briefing in Beijing, quote, "It is an important and sensitive period for the peninsula, and the urgency of a political solution has further increased." Geng said the international community should, quote, "prevent the peninsula from falling back into tense confrontation and avoid a serious reversal of the situation." Russia and China introduced a draft joint resolution at the United Nations on Monday, seeking to lift some of the punitive measures that have been enforced on Pyongyang over its nuclear activities. While Beijing is Pyongyang's most important diplomatic ally and key economic lifeline, it has backed sanctions against its neighbor in the wake of its nuclear activities. In other news, a German man who has served 33 years in a U.S. prison for a double murder arrived back in Germany on Tuesday after receiving parole. Officials in the state of Virginia allowed 53-year-old Jens Soering, the son of a diplomat, to be released on parole, but he has been banned from returning to the United States. In an emotional return to his home country, Soering was welcomed by friends who he said had backed him in his battle to be free.
Sie werden verstehen, dass das alles wirklich überwältigend ist für mich und dass ich jetzt erst einmal mich zurückziehen muss und zur Ruhe kommen muss. Ich muss hier psychologisch und emotional ankommen in Deutschland. Ich habe dieses Land 3 Jahrzehnte lang nicht mehr gesehen. Ich hoffe, Sie haben dafür Verständnis. Ich danke Ihnen. Ich freue mich so sehr. Ich freue mich so sehr. Danke. 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 I'm so happy to be in Germany after 33 years in prison in the United States. I'm so grateful to all my German supporters, and I'm grateful to my American supporters as well. I've had wonderful, wonderful friends in America, a lot of them police officers, and that's the only reason I'm here, because so many police officers came forward investigated this case, found out the truth, and they let me go.
Asking for some space to settle back into his life, Soering added that he would need some time away from the media spotlight.
I'm going to need some time to arrive in this country and visit with all my friends and really settle back into this life. So, please respect my privacy for the next few weeks.
In prison in 1986, Soering was serving a life sentence after having been convicted of killing the parents of his girlfriend, Elizabeth Haysom, who herself was jailed for complicity in the murders. Haysom's parents' bodies were found in 1985 riddled with knife slashes. Age 18 at the time of the crime, Soering first admitted to the killings, which he said he had carried out because the couple disapproved of his relationship with their daughter. He later retracted the confession, saying he admitted to the murders to spare his girlfriend from being sentenced to death. He had thought that he would benefit from diplomatic immunity as the son of a diplomat. The brutal murders shocked Germany and the United States, and the young couple were the key suspects from the beginning. They had fled the country before being arrested in Britain, which subsequently extradited them to the U.S. for jail. Since claiming his innocence, Soering has accused his former girlfriend of the crimes. Haysom, who admitted to complicity in the killings, is also to be released shortly and deported to her native Canada. Facing xenophobia in many countries where they seek refuge, young Venezuelans are settling on street corners in downtown La Paz, Bolivia, to sell candies to survive and to send a little money back home.
Pero siempre está eso de la xenofobia. Eres venezolano, hoy en día, bueno, lamentablemente, rompen un bombillo y fue un venezolano, ¿me entiendes? Y en todos los países que hemos visitado, bueno, lamentablemente la gente de repente hay mucha xenofobia, pues, mucha xenofobia. Luego, bueno, por los momentos Bolivia es un país estable, pues, que tiene estabilidad por lo menos económica, que de repente nos podemos comer hoy, más tarde, mañana. Y por eso estamos aquí, pues, buscando una estabilidad. Pues.
Y aquí estoy, gracias a Dios, por lo menos consigo las 3 comidas, por lo menos no tengo problemas con los bolivianos. Trato de pagarle, de enviarle a mi mamá para que ella pueda comer, tenga sus medicinas, para cada día, madre. Y tratar de salir adelante y con fe y con esperanza que Venezuela sea el mejor país del mundo algún día, para que todos volvamos a regresar. Quiero retomar otra vez a regresar a Arequipa, Perú, porque allá están mis hermanos, mi mamá. Quiero pasar Navidades con ellos. Pues yo estoy aquí, madre, porque no podía conseguir dinero allá, por la xenofobia, el maltrato. Uno no podía salir para la calle, madre. Por eso fue que retomé aquí. Y aquí estoy, luchando.
For centuries, the taiko drum has been an important part of Japanese culture. First used by the country's military, it became even more popular as it was integrated into the arts and culture. Nowadays, the taiko can still be heard on various occasions in many parts of the world. Eagle News correspondent Charmaine Sierra with the details.
Taiko is a Japanese word that literally means drum. The term has also come to refer to the art of Japanese drumming, also known as kumi-daiko. According to various sources, the taiko's origins can be traced as far back as India, almost 2,000 years ago. This instrument was not introduced to Japan until around the 5th or 6th century AD, at a time when Chinese and Korean cultures were also flourishing. When the oldest constitution of Japan was implemented in 702 AD, a department within the imperial court was established to adopt the taiko and use it for royal and military purposes. At around the 14th century, the taiko was incorporated into the classical Japanese dance and drama. making this instrument a recognizable part of Japan's culture ever since. These days, the taiko is commonly seen as the main attraction of a kumi daiko, a small performing group with drums and instruments of different shapes and sizes. This concept actually became popular only after World War II. Whether in Japan or elsewhere, in front of a large or small audience, the taiko drums are always an attention getter, just like these performers at a major shopping center in Honolulu. For Eagle News, this is Charmaine Serrera, always one with 25.
Thanks, Charmaine. That is today's Eagle News. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.net and eaglenewsalive.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Eagle News and on Facebook at facebook.com/Eagle News. Thank you for watching. I am Sarah Natman and I am one with 25.